I got to say about the Tampa Bay Bucs, they had one of the most weird off seasons that I could remember last year. They lost in the divisional playoffs against the eventual Super Bowl champions, the LA Rams. They failed to defend their Super Bowl title. And a couple weeks later, Tom Brady announced his retirement just like that. But then he went on to retract it like literally a month later. And then a couple weeks later or a month later, Bruce Arians retired as head coach and then took on a senior advisor role in the organization. And he gave his former role of head coach to his defensive coordinator, Todd Bowles. So it's slowly but surely creeping up as the winds of change. Even though Tom Brady was technically still there, and you still had at least most of the Super Bowl roster from 2020 still under contract, but questions remained about whether Tom Brady would regret unretiring, coming back for, what was his 23rd season. He was 45. But there were a lot of questions about whether or not the inevitable would happen for what some people are going to argue was the GOAT of football. And, initially, it didn't feel that way of regret as the Bucs started out 2-0. They looked relatively okay against the Cowboys and the New Orleans Saints. But you notice from then on out, they started to look noticeably worrisome. They started trending downward rapidly. They lost their next 5 or 6 games. Sure, you could say injuries happened. They lost the likes of Chris Godwin, Jamal Dean, Sean Murphy-Bunting, Shaquille Barrett to either multi-week or, in the case of Shaquille Barrett, their top linebacker, season-ending injuries. That definitely didn't help the Tampa Bay Bucs. But they were playing really bad football on both sides of the ball. The defense had a lot of trouble rushing the passer, even when Shaq Barrett was there, even when Levante David is there. But they just couldn't rush the passer. They couldn't get to quarterbacks. They even had more trouble doing so when they lost Shaq Barrett for the season with the ACL injury in Week 8. The Bucs secondary was nearly one of the worst in the league because they were very prone to letting small plays developing into big ones, and they left receivers too wide open very often. Perhaps the biggest problem of all for Tampa Bay was it looked like Father Time had come to collect Tom Brady. It looked like the inevitable, like I mentioned earlier, came to collect. Yeah, an offensive line that lacked Ryan Jensen for all the season didn't help, and they had a lot of offensive line combos didn't help. It seemed like Tom Brady looked completely lost. He was underthrowing and overthrowing his options at receiver while throwing more and more interceptions than he normally would. And the running game also didn't help matters. Leonard Fournette didn't have a great season, and his backup options, and I think it was Rashad White, or I can't remember the name, but the backup options behind Leonard Fournette weren't exactly inspiring either. Sure, they had their flashes of their past season success, but for every win that they had, especially late in the season, they reverted back to their bad forms, their bad habits. Just look at the 4-game stretch from Week 10 to Week 14, where they had a good win, where they showed their flashes of their good selves from the past. And then the next game, they were looking really bad on offense, where they would lose to teams like the Skid Marks, the Browns, and then they win against the Saints. And then the next week after, they were getting their asses whooped by the 49ers by a third-string quarterback, Brock Purdy. But because they were playing in a putrid NFC South where every team was just as bad as they were, and the division race was literally that tight, and at one point, they lost a division lead to the Atlanta Falcons. Yes, it was that bad. Everyone in that division had a losing record, including them. They still won a division in a Week 17 game against the Panthers in what was another showcase of what they could have been offensively. They were in a comeback win. But it was all a waste, though, because the next thing you know, their ship was sunk by the Dallas Cowboys in a Monday Night Wildcard game where their flaws were majorly exposed yet again. So, overall, not exactly a good season for the Tampa Bay Bucs, especially what turned out to be Tom Brady's final season. Going 8-9, Brady, sure, he was not okay, but not exactly that level of great. it certainly didn't help that it seemed like Father Time definitely did come to collect Brady. So now they enter an offseason of change because Tom Brady did exactly what he did a year before. He went on to retire. And it seems as of right now, it looks to stay that way permanently for good. So they enter an offseason moving on without their Super Bowl winning quarterback. And they were initially like in cap hell. They were initially dead in the water. Like their ship had really sunk down. They initially started around 55 million, which is really bad in money. So they weren't initially before free agency started, they weren't able to spend anything at all. But at least they got to a point where they were able to spend. Like as I'm recording this, they're like at least $1 million under the cap or in the green. Some of their key free agents include Lavonte David and Anthony Nelson. They were able to re-sign back Lavonte David. Corners, Jamal Dean and Sean Murphy-Bunting. Strong safeties, Logan Ryan, Mike Edwards. Free safeties, Keanu Neal. Defensive ends, Akeem Hicks and William Golston. And receivers, Julio Jones and Scotty Miller. Obviously, a lot of big free agents on the defensive side of the ball, which was key in that Super Bowl victory against the Kansas City Chiefs 2 years ago. So it was going to be impossible to sign and re-sign just about everybody. Fortunately for the Bucs, a little bit of releases and restructures of contracts allowed them to at least keep a little bit of those pieces, like re-sign Jamal Dean to a 4-year deal, restructuring the contracts of Carlton Davis, center Ryan Jensen, Chris Godwin, and defensive tackle Villa. So pretty much they're backloading the deals into later years. They released tight end Cameron Brate and lineman Donovan Smith and their top running back Leonard Fournette. They also managed to they managed to re-sign Lavonte David, but they also traded away guard Shaq Mason to the Texans for a 7th round pick. So for the Bucs, they're clearly entering a rebuilding phase. They're entering a transitionary period. So they still have a lot to address. They did get a quarterback to compete with Kyle Trask and Baker Mayfield, but this is Baker Mayfield's 4th team in like what? 3 years? Not even 3 years. Maybe like even the last year or so. Yeah, he was on the Panthers. He was on the Rams, and now he's on the Bucs. So actually the 3rd team in the last year or so. Not exactly a good track record for the former number 1 overall pick. So he's on a prove it deal. So let's see if he can win the starting job, or maybe the Bucs try and go the late 2nd round pick route again and get another quarterback to compete with them. I don't know. So the Bucs still have some things to figure out, especially at the running back position, because they did release Leonard Fournette. They got to find a quality running back in the draft. So otherwise, that running game is going to be very stagnant again. And they got to find another corner to replace Sean Murphy-Bunting. Sure, they got Carlton Davis and what was his name? Jamal Dean back. But, Sean Murphy-Bunting was very key to that defense still. And you can't exactly go freaking naked in the secondary without a 3rd cornerback. So you also want to fix the interior of the offensive line. They already traded away Shaq Mason to the Texans. And it's already bad enough that they were struggling to protect Brady last season, even when most of the starters came back. So they should find some linemen in the draft to compete with the current ones for the starting spot. So certainly a very disappointing 2022 for Bucs fans, and especially with the way they went out in that wildcard game against the Cowboys. Yeah, a blowout loss to end Brady's career. And it certainly is not going to get any better for them. Brady retired for good. They're entering this phase back to, I don't want to say irrelevancy, but back to reality for them. When you have the Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask compete for the starting spot, and pretty much not a lot of pieces on defense. But I mean, hey, you at least got two good years of playoff success and a Super Bowl title to show for it. So Bucs fans, hey, you can keep your head up high, and you got something to be proud of. So, hey, raise the flag, I guess.